Summer heat clung to Maple County like a wet shirt the day the photo came back to life for me, even though the year on the newspaper sleeve said 1987 and the clock on the wall said now. I was standing in the small records room of the Maple County Chronicle, that old red brick office by the river with the buzzing soda machine and a bell on the front door that never rang anymore. And I was there because a quiet itch in my head would not leave me alone. My name is Nora Reed. I am 39, and I swore I was done with that farmhouse and everything it did to us. But here I was asking the editor if I could check their archive for one specific roll of film. The rescue photo, the one they ran when Child Services pulled me, my brother Eli, and my baby sister June out of the Reed place. The editor, a kind woman with ink on her fingers and half-moon glasses, shrugged and waved me toward a metal cabinet. It smelled like dust and coffee. "If it's not in the sleeve, it never existed," she said, trying to make a joke, but my hands were already moving. I slid open the drawer, flipped past labels, found August 3rd, 1987, Maple Farm Neglect Read. Inside, a strip of negatives coiled like a sleeping snake, and a contact sheet with grease pencil circles. They had printed frame 12 back then, the one that made the front page. 3 kids with shock faces, a social worker crouched low like a catcher, a deputy holding the screen door so it wouldn't fall off its hinges. I remembered the air smelled like sour bread and wet dog, and I remembered the sound of bottles rolling under boots, but I never remembered the way the porch leaned like it wanted to throw us off. I held the strip to the light board and pressed the magnifier down, and that's when the itch in my head turned into a small cold river, because along the far left border, just past the porch rail, there was something the printer crop had sliced away. A child's bare foot, a thin leg, the hem of a long t-shirt, a stripe of hair like field straw, and half of a face peeking toward the camera. If you blinked, it could be a shadow. If you looked, it was a girl. I knew because a nerve in me fired like an old stove, and the name that rose up wasn't a name at all, just a shape of a sound I felt behind my tongue. I asked to scan the whole negative, not just the cropped frame, and the editor said, "Sure, knock yourself out." The scanner hummed, the image grew on the monitor, gray on gray. There we were, me and Eli and June, filthy and thin and looking heavier than our bodies. And there she was, the piece that never fit the story, a girl a little smaller than me, barefoot on the first step, head turned as if the sound of the shutter had surprised her. I leaned closer until my breath fogged the screen, and for a second, I smelled old wood and warm dust again, and I heard tapping, a weird tapping I used to think was mice in the walls. My chest went tight the way it does when a memory is about to break the surface. I printed the full photo on glossy paper and slid it into the sleeve of my messenger bag like it might run away. I walked out past the empty front desk, past the glass door with taped up notices for church dinners and youth softball, and out into the bright afternoon where the river moved slow like thick syrup. I told myself I was only going to drive by the old place, just to make the itch stop, just to prove to my adult brain that the porch and the rail and that thin barefoot girl were tricks of light and grief and old film grain. My car knew the roads, even if I claimed I didn't. Out of town, past the grain elevator and the new storage units, onto County Route 6 where the trees make a tunnel and the speed limit is a suggestion. The Reed farmhouse always sat back off the road like it was ashamed of being seen. A crooked roofline behind cottonwoods, and a wind-tilted mailbox. I pulled onto the shoulder, gravel ticking under the tires, and kept the engine running because I told myself I wasn't staying. The house looked smaller than in my head, 2 stories of tired paint and gutters drooping like tired mouths. The porch sagged but held. The screen door hung sideways like a bad grin. A for sale sign from another lifetime leaned in the weeds, letters faded to ghosts. I sat with my hands on the wheel and tried to count my breaths. In for 4, out for 4. That's what my therapist taught me when I said the past sometimes pressed on my chest like a stack of wet towels. I shut off the engine. The sudden quiet felt big and thick. Cicadas buzzed like power lines. A crow on the fence post tilted its head at me as if to say, "You again." I got out, and the heat climbed right onto my back. I didn't have to walk to the porch to know the boards would groan, but I walked anyway. I put my palm on the rail where in the photo the girl's shoulder brushed, and I felt splinters catch soft skin. Memory is a strange thing. It can be a locked door for years, then the hinge lets go with no warning. I took the print from my bag and held it up to the reel rail, lining up the angles like a kid with tracing paper. The spot where her foot should be was the third board from the post, where a knot shows like an eye. In the picture, that knot is dark, and near it, shadows crumple. And if you push your imagination too far, you see chains in every shade, so I tried not to push. I crouched and pressed my fingers along the floorboards and felt one spot give a whisper. Old wood does that, I told myself. Old wood swells and shrinks. It's nothing. Then my finger found a seam, not a crack, but a line where wood met wood with purpose. The square was about 3 feet on a side. I laid my palm flat and felt a coolness coming up from the gap, a breath from a room with its own air. I could have stood. I could have walked away. I could have told myself the county condemned this place, and so it belonged to official people with forms and badges, but the itch in my head had turned into something sharper, a little hook behind my ribs, and I knew if I didn't open this square, I would carry it home like a rattlesnake in a lunch bag. I used my key, then my flathead, then the tire iron from the trunk. The first time I pried, the wood said no. The second time, it said maybe. The third time, the board heaved up with a dry crack, and a smell climbed out. Old cloth and damp dirt, and a sour metal smell that made me cover my mouth. The hole was darker than it should have been, like light got tired halfway down. I angled my phone flashlight and swept the beam, and there, against the dirt wall, lay a tin cup with faded strawberries, a braid of yarn, 2 hair ribbons stuck together with grime, and a tiny line scratched into the joist just inside the lip of the hatch. 4 letters pushed hard into the grain. I am 4. My knees went soft, and I sat right down on the boards because the porch tilted and the world tilted with it. I aimed my phone and took photo after photo, like proof could pin down time. I thought about calling Detective Alma Cortez right then, but my thumb had already opened Eli's contact, because there are some things you try with blood before you try with law. He answered on the second ring with a voice that sounded like he was already bracing for something. "Nora, where are you?" I said the old place. He went quiet. I told him I found a hatch. I told him about the ribbons and the tin cup and the letters. I expected him to say, "Don't be dramatic. Don't go digging. Leave it alone." Instead, he said, "She wouldn't be there now." And then the line rustled like he'd covered the phone with his hand, and he backpedaled, said he meant nothing by it, said old junk made people imagine things. I heard a door close where he was, a muffled TV, our father's favorite game show that still runs in the afternoon like time never learned new tricks. I hung up before I said something I couldn't take back. I lay on my stomach and reached my arm into the square and touched the dirt, cool and damp, and a corner of paper flaked under my glove. I teased it free and saw blue crayon marks like a child had tried to draw a butterfly but only made 2 fat raindrops and a bent line. Easy shapes, kid shapes, the kind our teachers said were promising. I put the drawing in my bag and sat up, and the stupidest thing happened. I started to hum. It wasn't a song, just 3 notes that fell out of my mouth because my chest felt like a bottle you tap to see if it's empty. The notes were the ones I used to send through the wall at night for June. A little call and answer when the house went heavy, and the dark inside felt thicker than the dark outside. Somebody always tapped back. I told myself it was Eli, or it was the boiler clinking, or it was mice the size of baseballs, and maybe it was. But the beam of my phone caught another scratch low on the joist. 4 short lines grouped together with 2 little gaps in between, and I saw the old rhythm in them: tap, 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 pause, tap, 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 pause, tap. I didn't want this. I didn't want any of this. I wanted my quiet apartment above the bakery, and my job at the hotel front desk, and the way the sunrise looks in the reflection of the river across from the parking lot. I wanted small life. But easy life sits on top of old life like a rug, and once you lift a corner, you feel the grit everywhere. I put the board back as best I could, and took the print of the rescue photo and slid it under my shirt, because it felt like a second skin, cold and flat. The sun had slid west, and the shadow of the cottonwood had moved across the porch steps like a slow hand. I locked the car and drove into town, and the courthouse clock said 5:15, and the diner was closing early because the cook's grandson had a baseball game. I didn't eat. I drove straight to the sheriff's office, even though I knew Alma might not be there. The front desk deputy looked at me like folks do when they know your last name and your history. I said, "Detective Cortez if she's in," and he made a call and said, "You're in luck." And then her office door opened, and she stood in the frame with her sleeves rolled and a rubber band on her wrist, and eyes like she had already seen this day from far away. We had met once before when a missing person case brought her to the hotel lobby, and she heard my last name and said, gently, that she had read files from the old case, and that sometimes files leave out more than they hold. I put the glossy photo on her desk and said I needed her to look at the left edge, and she did not rush like people do. She leaned in and breathed out and said, "Huh?" like the sound someone makes when a locked drawer opens with the wrong key. I told her about the hatch and the tin cup and the letters and Eli's bad sentence. She wrote it all in a small notebook with a blue pen. She did not say the word trespass or contamination of a scene or chain of custody. She said, "Okay, Nora, take me there," and for reasons I could not name, the air in my chest lightened by a thread. We drove back with quiet between us, the kind that is not empty but careful. When we turned onto the gravel, the crow was gone, and a stray dog nosed around the ditch. We stepped onto the porch, and Alma knelt like someone who grew up with porches and knows where the rot hides. She tapped the boards, felt the seam, used my tire iron, popped the hatch, and let her flashlight find what my phone light had found. She did not swear or gasp. She said, "Document first," and took slow photos from 4 angles. She bagged the tin cup and the ribbon, pointed out a plastic bead half sunk in dirt that looked like it once lived on a bracelet. I knew that bead. I had strung one like it for June in a motel after the rescue, thousands of miles away in a different life. I felt dizzy. Alma looked up at me and asked if I was okay. I said yes, because I was tired of saying no. She called it in, not like a raid, not like a circus, just a steady voice asking for a unit to mark the property and a tech to swing by with gloves and a kit. While we waited, I stood with my hands on the rail where the left edge of the photo cut the world in half. The field hummed. A cloud moved over the sun, and the porch cooled, and I thought about the editor's line, "If it's not in the sleeve, it never existed." But here was a board that lifted, and here were letters in wood, and here was a girl on the edge of a picture with her mouth half open, as if to say something small and human, like "Wait," or "I'm here." I said to the air, easy and slow so my voice wouldn't shake, "I see you." I didn't know if anyone could hear from a place that was mostly gone, but I said it anyway. The unit pulled up, and a young deputy with a polite face stepped out and took notes like this was any other weird day. Alma told him to tape the steps and keep folks back. He asked who folks would be, and she gave me a look I understood. Once a story stands up, it walks. I watched the porch while the light changed, and I thought about how the paper cropped a child out of a frame, because a crop makes a cleaner story, and how our heads crop things too, so we can keep walking forward. I thought about the itch that had sent me to a metal drawer in a quiet office, and how that itch wasn't madness or drama. It was a little built-in alarm, the one that says something is missing, go find it. And I knew in a way that was heavy and clear as a river rock, that going to find it would cost me sleep and maybe friends and a few layers of skin. But I also knew there are bills you can't duck forever. The sun slid, the tape fluttered. The deputy took a call, and Alma asked if I had eaten. I said no. She handed me a granola bar from her glove box, with a look that said she wasn't going to let me faint on her case. I ate it even though my stomach felt like it had forgotten how. By the time the evidence tech arrived, the day had thinned out. We did the careful work. We wrote the times. We closed the hatch. Then Alma locked eyes with me and said we would come back in the morning with better light and more hands. I nodded like a promise. I got in my car and tucked the glossy photo back into the bag and drove toward town. The diner had turned off its neon sign, the river had turned to dark glass, and the courthouse clock chimed 6 slow notes that swung out over Maple County, like they always do. In my rear view, I could still see the porch rail, just a slice of it, silver in the last light, and in that slice the edge of a girl who should never have been an edge at all. Morning came soft and pale over Maple County, but the old farmhouse did not look softer. It looked like a tired boxer in the corner of the ring, breathing slow, waiting for the next hit. And I stood in the yard with coffee in a paper cup and the rescue photo tucked inside my bag like a passport. Detective Alma Cortez pulled up in her gray sedan at 7 sharp, hair pulled back, sleeves rolled again, the same rubber band on her wrist, and behind her, a county forensic van rattled into the drive, 2 techs stepping out with cases and careful faces. Dew coated the grass, soaking the cuffs of my jeans as we walked, and the porch boards were cool under our shoes. Alma didn't waste words. She showed the lead tech the hatch line I had found and ran through what we saw yesterday. The tin cup with strawberries, the ribbon, the bead, the scratch marks, the 4 tiny cuts in the joist that looked like the rhythm I had knocked at the wall as a kid. A lead tech nodded and said they'd start slow, document everything, lift fibers, collect air, because air holds stories too. While they set up, I stood with my palm on the porch rail at the same spot the unknown girl's shoulder had brushed in the photo and tried to breathe even, in for 4, out for 4, like the therapist taught me. Alma glanced at me and said, "You good?" And I lied, said, "Good enough," because anything more honest would have cracked my voice. The techs unrolled yellow tape and set up a light on a stand, and one of them, a woman with a bob cut and kind eyes, explained each step as if I were a trainee, maybe to give my brain something to hold. She slid on fresh gloves and eased the board up with thin tools, not a crowbar this time, but a set of flat steel wedges. The hatch lifted without a squeal today, because the wood remembered yesterday. Cold air breathed out. The smell rose again, cloth, dirt, metal, like wet pennies in a jar. The bob-cut tech aimed a small camera and took a dozen shots, then a dozen more. She lifted the tin cup, and I saw the strawberries were not just painted, they were stickers under a layer of grime. On the cup's lip was a faint mark, maybe teeth, a tiny crescent. The ribbon came out next, 2 stuck together, pink once, now dull rose. She slipped each into its own paper bag and wrote the time. The other tech brushed at the dirt lip and found another bead, this one blue, and held it up with tweezers. I looked away because a bead that small can carry a whole afternoon from 30 years ago. Alma crouched, steady, and ran her light along the joist again. The scratch letters were clearer in morning light. I am 4. Below them, almost lost in dust, a scuff mark shaped like a circle, the kind made by a cup set down in the same spot over and over until it wore a faint ring. Alma asked the tech to cast the ring in the letters, and while they mixed the silicone, she turned to me and said, "You said you heard tapping when you were a kid. 4, 3, 1? And I nodded and showed her with my knuckle on the rail. Tap, 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 pob, pause, tap, tap, pob, pause, tap. The bob cut tech paused and said, "You know, some kids make codes like that. It's a way to talk when you aren't allowed to talk." And then she went back to her careful work, and I stared at the square and felt my stomach tighten, because words like allowed land differently when you grew up with doors that stuck and rooms that didn't have locks but might as well have had. Alma stood and asked if we could widen the opening a few inches for a better view. The techs agreed and slid the next board with slow patience so they wouldn't crack the old tongue and groove. As they worked, a truck slowed at the road, then rolled on. Birds hacked at the tall weeds. The world kept being the world. When the second board lifted, more of the crawl space showed. A narrow trench dug by hand along the foundation, lined with broken linoleum strips like someone tried to make the dirt into a floor. A child's plastic spoon lay in the corner, faded yellow, handle chewed to a ragged edge. There were 2 little dolls missing arms, cheap dolls from a gas station bin, hair matted, eyes scratched. The bob cut tech bagged those too. "Do you remember these?" Alma asked softly. "No," I said, because I did not want to force my memory to make a shape and call it truth. She nodded, not pushing, just letting my no hang there. The lead tech took air samples and scraped a small swab from the dirt where the ring mark was. "If there was urine," he said, "it may carry urea in the soil for a long time. It could tell us a person was here, not just things." I felt my face heat up. It's one thing to imagine a child hidden. It's another to hear the science of bodies reduced to lab terms. Still, I was glad for the science, because memories can be doubted, but a lab swab speaks in a calm voice no one can bully. Alma asked me to sit on the steps while they went down into the space. I sat, hands tight on my knees. I could see their shoulders moving, hear their careful shoes on dirt, hear the soft scratch of a brush. Alma's light swept, paused, swept again. "There," she said. "Hold on." The lead tech's voice came up low. "We've got etching on the interior beam. Looks like child height, sharp object," repeated. He slid back into view and passed up a mirror shard wrapped in gauze. This was under the joist. I looked at the shard and saw a little star sticker on the back, like one June used to hand out after we cleaned up our room, even when there was nothing to clean but air. Alma's phone buzzed, and she stepped aside to answer. The call was short. She came back with her mouth tight. "What?" I asked. "Just logistics," she said. A good lie that was kind because she could tell I was hanging my threads. They found more. A tiny plastic ring from a vending machine, a scrap of paper with blue crayon marks, a hairbrush with half its bristles missing, a penny dated 1986. The bob cut text said, "That helps us bracket." And I thought of the rescue in 87 and how a year can stretch when you are small. Then the lead tech said, "Detective, you should see this." And Alma went down into the hole, and I stood even though she had told me to stay put. I bent and looked and saw where the trench dogleg under the stairs. There, someone had pressed patterns into the dirt over and over, like a kid making stamps. The pattern was a butterfly, simple, crooked wings, not printed by a toy by a thumb. The right wing was always bigger, like the maker's hand favored one side. The lead tech said, Will cast a few, and Alma shot me a quick look that wasn't pity. It was respect, like she knew I could hold this much pain without drowning, at least for a while. While they worked, a county unit rolled up and a neighbor in a ball cap drifted near the fence line with a just curious posture. The deputy turned him away, but I felt the story's legs grow. People love a mystery at a safe distance. They love a tingle without the years that built it. Alma knew it too. She called the PIO, said to keep it quiet for now, said we were looking at historical items, which is a tidy phrase for a small hell under a porch. By 10, the light had shifted, and the hatch area was a white square in the morning sun. The techs had bagged what they could see without tearing up the scene. Alma said we'd pause, regroup, and get a warrant to open the inside rooms so we could check for any connected spaces. I nodded, relief and fear mixed, because pausing meant going home to sit with what we had, and going home meant the photo would burn holes in my bag. As we stepped off the porch, my phone buzzed. It was an unknown number. I almost let it go, but the screen tugged my gut. I answered and heard nothing at first, just a hum like an old fridge, then a woman's voice so flat it sounded like it had been ironed. Stop. There was no fourth, and then a click. The sound was not my mother's. It was not a voice from my past that I could name. It was a voice trained to be blank. Alma saw my face shift. What? She asked. I told her. She said, we'll pull your call logs and run the number. Don't answer unknowns for now. I nodded and felt childish for nodding, then angry for feeling childish. Alma's eyes were steady and kind, and that helped. We did not leave yet. She wanted one more pass around the house, slow. We walked the west wall, where in the rescue photo the left edge cut off a sliver of something I had not been ready to see yesterday. Up close, the siding showed tiny round holes, like someone once ran wires into the wall and later patched them with putty. We found a small square mismatch in the boards, like a patch job done by an impatient hand. Alma traced it with her finger. This could be a hidden panel, she said. Next time, the lead tech called from the porch, we'll bring the thermal cam. I looked up at the eave where a swallow nest clung to the corner and remembered lying awake as a kid listening to the scratching and telling myself it was birds. Maybe it was, sometimes. Maybe it wasn't. On our way to the cars, Alma stopped by the old shed where my father kept rust and threats. A chain hung from the door, but the lock was orange and weak, a decoration more than a guard. We'll do this right, she said, but I want to look through the gap. She held her light to the crack and peered in. Dust motes danced. The smell of oil and mouse nests drifted out. Then she said, quiet, Nora, and I stepped up and looked. On the interior wall, someone had driven nails in a neat grid, 10 across, 4 down, like a pegboard made by a person who hated chaos. On 3 of the nails hung paper tags on string, curled with age, stamped with dates, and one had a word written in dull red marker, unnamed. I backed away, stomach flipping. Alma didn't touch the door. She just looked at me and said, we will come back with a proper entry. And that sentence felt like a hand on my back, keeping me upright. We wrapped for the day. The techs left with their careful bags. The deputy pulled the tape tighter and locked the gate. Alma and I stood for a last minute in the shade of the porch, where the cool air from the hatch still breathed up like a quiet mouth. You did right to come, she said. I wanted to say I wasn't sure, that right and wrong both hurt, but I just nodded. I drove to town with the AC on high, though the day had turned mild. I parked by the river and watched the water slide past the old bridge. My phone buzzed again, another unknown, and I let it die. I took the glossy rescue photo from my bag and laid it on the passenger seat. I looked at the left edge, the thin bare foot, the line of hair, the half face, and I said out loud, plain as I could, I see you. I'm coming back tomorrow. And it wasn't a promise to the dead, not only. It was a promise to the living person I still was, the kid who had knocked on the wall and waited for someone to knock back. A breeze came off the river and lifted the photo's corner and set it down again like a small, careful nod. By afternoon, the warrant came through, and the air over Maple County felt heavy, like the sky had been holding its breath for us. Detective Alma Cortez read the paper twice, folded it into her pocket, and said, "We do this slow." And I said, "I can do slow," even though every part of me wanted to rush, to tear boards with my hands, to make the house spit out everything it had swallowed. The deputy unlocked the tape line, the forensic van backed up to the porch, and the lead tech rolled out a padded case with tools that looked too gentle for what I remembered this place could be. We started with the west wall patch, the small square Alma's finger had traced yesterday. The bob cut tech warmed the putty with a heat gun and worked a thin spatula under the edge until the old filler peeled like skin after a sunburn. Behind it, not insulation, but a shallow wooden door no bigger than a school notebook, nailed in with finish nails set flush and painted to hide. She slid a cat's paw under one head and lifted, then another slow, counting them out like a bedtime story. When the last nail came free, she took a breath the way you do before you open a box you didn't ask to inherit and tilted the panel toward the light. Inside was a narrow cubby built between studs, 2 crude shelves, a flattened pillowcase, and a plastic cup with faded kittens. The pillowcase smelled like dust and old soap, and the cup's rim had tiny grooves like someone had run a fingernail around it over and over. On the back of the cubby, cut into the wood with something sharp and patient, was a row of marks arranged in groups 4 short strokes, then 3, then 1, repeated so many times the wood had become a kind of paper. Beneath the pattern, a name showed in tiny letters, uneven but determined, Elsie. I said it out loud without meaning to, and my voice sounded soft and wrong in the big empty room. The bob-cut tech looked up at Alma, and Alma met my eyes in a way that said she would catalog this as evidence, and also as proof that what I remembered wasn't just a dream. We bagged the cup and a loose thread from the pillowcase. Then Alma's light caught the edge of a cassette, no label, just gray plastic scuffed white at the corners, wedged behind a splinter. The tech gloved, eased it out, slid it into a hard case like a jewel. "We'll see what the lab can save," she said, and I nodded, thinking how tiny machines sometimes hold braver truths than people do. Next came the shed, the one with the orange lock that had crumbled to the idea of a lock. The warrant covered it, but Alma still spoke to the air before we opened the door, as if asking the house not to fight us. The hinges squealed, and a wave of hot, stale air rolled out, sharp with mouse droppings and old oil. Dust motes exploded in the light. I stepped back and let the techs go first. Along the wall, the grid of nails I'd seen through the crack looked even more exact up close 10 across. 4 down, hammered to equal depth by someone who liked control. Most were bare now, but 3 still held paper tags on string, each the size of a library checkout slip. The edges had curled, the ink had bled, but you could read enough. May 14th, 86, ANGELA compliant. The 2nd of September, 86, Mira, quiet room. The 12th of July, 86, unnamed, bright hair, unregistered. The words unregistered and quiet room hit me in the stomach harder than any cuss. These weren't notes of parent rights. These were lab lines. The lead tech lifted each tag with a clean spatula into a bag, reading the dates aloud for the record. Above the grid, in pencil so light you could miss it if the sun moved, someone had drawn a butterfly split down the middle with a straight line. The right wing was shaded. I reached out before I could stop myself, and Alma's voice caught me back. "Nora, let us," and I pulled my hand to my chest, fingers shaking. In the shed's back corner sat a wooden box the size of a microwave, the lid nailed shut with tiny brads. One of the brads had worked loose and left a crescent of rust. The bob-cut tech pried the lid with patient force. Inside, index cards stacked in rubber band bundles, a thrift store's worth of handwriting. A top card read Observer 6 Static Elsie in a cramped, slanted hand. I felt something in me tilt like a picture on a wall after a truck goes by. There were other cards, Subject 3, integrated. Subject 4, expired. Subject 5, relocated. The calm of the words was worse than anything, the way they pretended to be neutral while they took breath from people. Alma's jaw worked like she was chewing anger and trying to swallow it back into duty. She had the text photograph every angle of the box, her voice steady, her face stormed. My phone buzzed, an unknown again, and against Alma's advice I answered because I was tired of being told when to be scared. The line clicked, a thin hum, then a voice I didn't know but felt like I should. Male, smooth like a radio host who practices falling asleep and waking up at the same second. Stop digging. You're waking things better left where they lie. And I said, say her name. And the voice went quiet a beat too long and then said, there was no fourth, and disconnected. I stood there in the shed with the dust and the cards and the smell of mice and metal, and wanted to throw my phone into the weeds. Alma took it gently from my hand, closed her eyes for a count, and passed it to the deputy to log. We'll pull it from the carrier, she said. You're not alone in this. We moved back into the house with the light changing from white to yellow to a harsher gold that made the warped floorboards look like waves. The forensic team worked the hallway vent I'd pointed out the first day, the screws that didn't match. When the grate came free, we found not ductwork, but a handmade shaft boxed in with plywood, lined with old egg crate foam, like somebody tried to keep sound from leaking. The shaft ran 3 feet and opened into a small chamber under the hall, just tall enough to sit. The floor was concrete, rough and pitted. In the center, a metal chair had been bolted down and later cut loose, bolts ground flat to keep shoes from catching. On the wall at knee height were crayon lines in blue and red, stacked like short horizons. Close to the corner, someone had written slanted in small, 4 does not pass. 4 stays. The bob-cut tech knelt and read the lines like a gravestone. Beside the chair was a box of My Little Pony toys, still in their 80s blister packs, their cardboard bright where the sun had never touched, their plastic yellowed. Bribes, I thought, and then hated the word because it meant someone knew exactly what they were doing hurt, and reward, repeat, record. The lead tech found a hair caught in a splinter and bagged it. He hummed a song not on purpose, the way people do when they're trying not to hear a different sound from their own heads. The deputy radioed that a neighbor was back at the fence line with a phone held up like a badge. Alma went out and talked to him. Her voice stayed low, but her hand cut the air once like a door closing. When she returned, she said the words I feared and needed. We're going to be on the news if we don't move fast. We do not want the crowd dictating our steps. She asked if I could take a break, get food, sit somewhere with air conditioning, while they cataloged what we'd already opened. I said no, because leaving felt like turning off a light in a room where someone was still sitting. She didn't argue. She handed me water and pointed to the porch where there was shade, and I sat and drank and let the heat push at my shoulders, while the teens' voices rose and fell inside like a tide. I thought about the rescue photo tucked in my bag, and about the way the left edge cut a child in half so the story could fit the page. I thought about Eli's line, she wouldn't be there now, and turned it over until the words went dull. I texted him, just 3 words, come, tell me, and left the phone screen blank on my knee. The wind carried the smell of cut hay from a field beyond the cottonwoods. A train horn bled through from the far tracks. Small normal sounds tried to lay a blanket over the day and failed. When the bob-cut tech stepped to the door and said, "Detective," I stood without meaning to. Alma joined her, and they both looked toward the living room wall, where the wallpaper had bubbled in one spot like a bruise. The tech slipped the blade under the seam and peeled back a long strip with a slow hiss. Behind it, bare wood shone scribbles, tallies, and a shape so simple and terrible I had to lean on the rail. 4 stick figures, 3 with X's through their heads, 1 circled with a shaky line. Under the circle a butterfly, crooked, right wing bigger. Under that, in a child's hand, not a name but a sentence made of hope and fear and instruction. If I'm not here, listen, tap. I put my knuckle on the rail and let it fall in the old pattern. Tap, 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 pause, tap, 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 pause, tap. And for the first time since we opened the hatch, a sound answered that wasn't my memory. Faint, from somewhere deeper than the crawl space. A soft tick-tick like a bead falling in a glass bowl. 3 times, then once. Alma didn't move for a breath, and then her head turned slow, the way a dog's ears turn when the wind shifts. The house, tired and mean and full of kept air, held the sound for us and then swallowed it. "Subfloor," the lead tech said, already on his knees with a flashlight. "There's another void." Alma looked at me, not to ask, but to say, "You are right. You are not alone. We are going to keep going." And I felt the fear and the relief hit at the same time so hard that my vision blurred and steadied again. Outside, the sky finally let go of the breath it had been holding, and a low roll of thunder walked across the fields, the kind that promises rain and a cooler night, and a mess of mud, and, maybe, if you keep standing there, the sound of something long hidden coming loose. Rain had broken overnight, soft at first, then heavy enough to soak the porch boards and darken the dust paths across the yard. By morning, clouds drifted like gray bruises over Maple County, and the Reed farmhouse sat slick and swollen with damp. Detective Alma Cortez met me at the drive. She wore the same blazer, sleeves rolled high, eyes shadowed from too little sleep. "You sure you want to go again today?" she asked. I nodded because stopping felt worse than starting Dot inside. The team had taped plastic sheets along the hall to hold in dust while they worked the subfloor. The boards where we'd heard the answering taps had been pried loose, stacked against the wall like ribs. Beneath, a new cavity yawned, a square chamber braced with scrap lumber and chicken wire. The air rising from it smelled of wet clay and old insulation. The lead tech crouched at the edge, flashlight steady, and said, "It goes farther. At least 10 feet, maybe a turn." Alma signaled me to wait, but I followed anyway. The crawl space floor was uneven, hard-packed dirt. My knees brushed webs and splinters. The tunnel angled sharply left, then opened into a low chamber. The beam of my light struck the far wall first. Rows of scratches, carved by hand, deep and ragged. They weren't random. They came in sets 4 strokes, 3, 1 repeated across every plank like a language of survival. I touched one, feeling grooves where small fingers had dug in until they split. My throat closed. Dot in the corner sat a child's mattress, reduced to sagging coils wrapped in mold. Next to it, a ceramic dish holding the husks of dried flowers. Dandelions, gray and mummified, their stems curled to dust. Alma crouched beside me, jaw tight. "This was lived in," she said. She lifted the dish gently into an evidence bag. Not for hours, for weeks, maybe longer. Something else caught my eye beneath the joist. A nailed board with crude letters burned into the surface. Princess Pit. My stomach rolled. A name, not for a room, but for a sentence. Someone had named this hole like a pet. I leaned forward and saw a torn nightgown tangled in pink plastic chain links, unicorns still visible in the faded print. A child had slept here, fought here, maybe begged here. A call came from behind the bend. "Detective, we've got something." Alma and I crawled farther until the light found a small grill embedded in the dirt wall. A ventilation chute, no wider than my fist. On the other side was darkness. The tech slid in a gloved hand and drew out a folded scrap of paper. Old, yellowed, edges chewed by insects. Alma unfolded it under her light. Red crayon scrawled across the page. "Dear Nora, you knocked back. Thank you. I'm still waiting. I'm still here." My chest broke open. I remembered it, the rhythm against my wall, the silly game I thought I'd played with Eli. 4 knocks, 3, 1. It hadn't been him. It had been her. "She wrote me," I whispered. Alma put a hand on my shoulder, but said nothing. Back at the sheriff's office, the evidence spread across a long table. The shoe from the porch hatch, the chain links, the gown, the scratched beam, the note in red crayon. Alma's recorder clicked on. This chamber under the Reed house is no accident. It was built, named, and occupied. We are treating it as a crime scene and potentially as a burial site. I told her about the wall taps, about the voice I'd remembered in dreams but buried. I told her how Eli denied it, then slipped. Alma listened, her face unreadable, only the pen in her hand moving, jotting lines. "We'll need to talk to your brother," she said at last. "But Nora, this isn't neglect. This is systematic. Conditioning, confinement. It's something else." She wasn't wrong. Because when I closed my eyes, I heard again the rhyme I hadn't thought about in decades. 1 for food, 2 for light, 3 for sleep, and 4 for night. My father's voice drilling it into us, like prayer, like law. At the time, it was nothing but sound. Now I knew it was a code. I was 3. Someone else had been 4. That night, I couldn't stay at the motel. I drove back to the property and parked under the collapsed carport. The house was dark, the tape lines sagging in the wet air. I didn't cross it. I only sat in the car with the photograph spread on the passenger seat. The uncropped one. The girl half shadowed by the porch rail. Barefoot, her eyes turned to the camera. Collie, Elsie, whatever her name truly was, she had lived in the pit under my feet, sent me notes through the vent, tapped to remind me she existed. And no one remembered her but me. The phone buzzed in the dark. Unknown number. A text, "Do not dig the garden." She was never planted. She was discarded. I dropped the phone. My hands shook as I picked it up again. Outside, the wind hissed through the trees, lifting the plastic crime scene tape so it snapped against the post like a warning flag. I pressed the photo flat with my palm. "You weren't discarded," I whispered. I remember. The house loomed black, windows blank like blind eyes, but behind them I imagined movement, shadows shifting, small hands tapping, a whisper carried through vents. "Still here." And I swore to myself, out loud, with rain pattering the windshield, "I will dig. I will name you. And I will not stop until everyone knows you are real." The storm broke fully the next morning, a hard silver rain flattening the fields and turning the Reed house yard into thick mud. Detective Alma Cortez arrived before sunrise with coffee she didn't drink and eyes like she hadn't closed them at all. The forensic van idled by the porch, lights washing the wet wood in red and blue. "We've got to clear the furnace room," Alma said, her voice low. "Blueprints show it was sealed since the 80s. If there's anything left, it'll be in there." The furnace room door had been painted over a dozen times, like someone meant to bury it in layers of color. The knob snapped off at the first twist. Alma's crowbar did the rest. the door ripping away with a groan that sounded too human. Inside was a square of darkness, colder than the rest of the house. The cast iron furnace squatted in the corner like a monster, with its mouth open, teeth rusted orange. My light beam slid across the floor, catching fragments, scorched fabric, bits of porcelain dot near the furnace. Throat lay a doll, blackened by fire, its porcelain face cracked, one eye missing. Across the charred hem of its dress, a child's handwriting in red marker spelled a name. Collie. My chest seized. Alma sealed the doll in evidence plastic, but she didn't need to say anything. I knew what it meant. Someone had tried to burn her out of existence. We searched the walls and found more. Faint drawings etched into the cinder block, butterflies, uneven stars, rows of marks grouped in fours. They weren't decoration. They were survival scratches, each one a tally of days endured. Alma crouched low, tracing the lines without touching. She fought to stay remembered, she said. While the crew worked, I stepped back into the hall, shaking. My phone buzzed again. Another unknown text. Stop remembering. She never had a name. I nearly threw it against the wall, but Alma took it from my hands. They're watching, she said. That means we're close. By mid-afternoon, the text had widened the crawl beneath the stairs. What we thought was a storage void turned out to be a narrow passage sloping down under the foundation. Dirt walls reinforced with wood and wire. At the end, a padlocked hatch. The bolt cutters snapped it, and the panel gave way with a groan. Inside was a hidden room, no windows, no wiring. A single wooden chair bolted to the floor, straps frayed on its arms. In the corner, a rusted bed frame with a blanket sewn with faded princess crowns. Beneath it, a bundle wrapped in brittle plastic sheeting. My knees buckled. Alma knelt, pulled back the layers, and there it was. A child's bones curled tight, hands clutched around a ceramic butterfly, paint still bright blue on its wings. I couldn't breathe. That butterfly was mine. I'd made it in first grade, a Mother's Day gift my mother never wanted. I had dropped it through the grate one night when I heard crying. I had given it to the girl in the walls, and she had held it until the end. On the wall behind the bed, scratched deep into the wood, was a message. I was the fourth. My name was Collie. Please don't forget me. Alma closed her eyes, steadying herself, then called the team to bag and tag. The air in that room was heavy, too heavy. Like the house itself exhaled sorrow it had hoarded for decades. When we came back up, the rain had stopped. The yard steamed under a weak sun. I sat on the porch steps, mud clinging to my shoes. The image of the butterfly burned into my mind. Alma sat beside me. She didn't speak for a long time. Finally, she said, "We're filing this as homicide. No more questions about neglect. No more silence." I nodded, tears hot in my throat. "She was real," I whispered. All those years they told me she wasn't, but she was real. Alma rested a hand on my shoulder, firm, grounding. "Now the world knows too," she said. That night, back in my motel, I spread the photo on the bed, the one with Collie half-shadowed on the porch steps. I placed the evidence photo of the butterfly beside it. Proof. 2 fragments of a life almost erased. My phone buzzed once more, screen lighting the dark. Another text. "You dug too deep." There were more than 4. I stared at the words, cold settling in my chest. More. The pit, the wall scratches, the doll, those were not the end. They were only the beginning. The morning after Callie's remains were pulled from beneath the house, Mabel County felt different. The town was still quiet, still small, but everywhere I looked, gas station, diner, the courthouse square faces turned toward me like they knew. Some did. Word spreads fast when bones are found in the dirt. But it wasn't gossip that kept me awake. It was what the last text had said. There were more than 4. Detective Alma Cortez picked me up before sunrise. Her eyes were bloodshot, her hair tied back in a rough knot. She had a box in the backseat, labeled County Archive. She didn't explain until we pulled into the sheriff's office. "Pulled these from storage," she said, sliding the box across a conference table. "Original Reed case files. Thought we'd dig deeper." Inside were brittle manila folders, some water-stained, some half-eaten by time. Court reports, foster placement forms, old photographs. But halfway down, something strange. Not county paperwork, but hospital files. The letterhead read, Meridian County Health Clinic, Behavioral Wing. Dates from 1985, scribbled on the corner of one sheet, property of Reed household. To be returned after trial. I skimmed the file, my stomach tightening. The paper listed subjects by number, not by name. Notes beside each entry. Quiet, compliant, relocated, integrated. One entry stopped me cold. Subject 4, expired. Another, Subject 6, retained, static. Where'd these come from? I asked. Doc Alma shook her head. Don't know. They were shoved into the Reed evidence box. Someone mixed them in or wanted them lost. A chill settled over me. The word retained scratched in my mind like nails on glass. Retained where? Retained how? That afternoon, we drove out to the old Meridian Clinic, now a rotted husk by the county line. The windows were gone, walls stripped by scavengers, weeds grown high around the lot. But the behavioral wing still stood an annex with boards nailed over its doors. Alma pried one loose, and we stepped inside. The air was sour, full of mildew and rat droppings. The hall stretched long and narrow, lined with exam rooms gutted decades ago. In the last room, ceiling tiles sagged. Alma shone her light upward. There, she said, a square tile, newer than the rest. She climbed onto a chair, pried it down, and out slid a bundle wrapped in plastic. Inside were index cards, dozens, maybe hundreds. Each bore a date, a number, and a single phrase. Subject 5, too small, relocated. Subject 7, defective, quiet room. Subject 8, compliant, transferred. And then the one that made me tremble. Unnamed, bright hair, unregistered. It was Cauley. Reduced to a card. A phrase. A non-person. Alma stacked the cards carefully, her jaw clenched. This was organized, she muttered. Not just your parents. Not just a single house. There were others. The last card in the bundle had no number, no name. Only a symbol drawn in ink, half a butterfly. Under it, the word observer. I sat down hard on the broken chair. Observer. My thoughts raced back to the west wall of the house, to the hidden hatch and the carved name. I'm Elsie. I listened. She wasn't a prisoner, I whispered. She was part of it. They made her watch. They made her record. Alma frowned. A child can't be an observer, but I knew better. I remembered the vents, the scratching, the strange silence that used to creep through the house at night. Maybe Elsie had been forced to stay quiet, to log what happened to the others. Maybe they called that functioning. The rain began outside, slow and steady, dripping through holes in the roof. Alma bagged the cards, but I stayed staring at that half-butterfly symbol. It wasn't just a mark. It was a brand, a system, a machine that had turned children into entries, into property. When we left, the wind carried the smell of wet weeds and mold. My phone buzzed again. A text from the same unknown number. Static never leaves. Static records everything. My hands shook as I shoved the phone into my pocket. Alma didn't notice. She was already on the radio calling for state investigators. But I knew. Whoever was sending the messages wasn't just watching. They knew the language, the codes, the roles. They knew about static. That night, back at the motel, I spread the files across the bed. The words swam in front of me. Relocated, quiet room, transferred, expired. I thought of the ceramic butterfly in Callie's hands, of the scratches in the princess pit, of Elsie's whisper carved into wood. I thought of the rhyme, the one my father used to chant. 1 for food, 2 for light, 3 for sleep, 4 for night. I realized then that the rhyme wasn't a lullaby. It was a program, a set of steps, conditioning carved into our bones. And for Callie, for Elsie, for the others whose names had been stripped away, it was a sentence. I lay back, eyes on the stained ceiling, listening to the rain. And in the silence between drops, I swore I heard it again. 4 taps, 3, 1. Not memory, not dream. A message carried through time, that they were still knocking. And it was my turn to answer. The days blurred after the discovery at the Meridian Clinic. News crews camped outside Maple County, their vans lined along the highway like vultures waiting for scraps. Detective Alma tried to shield me, but word was out, bones in the ground, secret rooms, files marked with numbers instead of names. Everyone wanted answers, but none came fast enough. I spent most of my time at the Reed house, even after the forensic crews taped it shut again. I couldn't stay away. The walls seemed alive now, breathing with the echoes of those who'd been hidden inside. One afternoon, I walked the west wall alone, tracing the boards where Elsie's name had been scratched. My hand found a seam I hadn't noticed before, a tiny panel nailed tight. I pried it open with my pocket knife. Inside was a broken tape recorder, warped by moisture, but still holding a cassette. Across the label, in faint pencil, "I am still here. Alma," had it rushed to the lab. The text cleaned it enough to play. Static filled the room first, then a child's voice, trembling but steady. "My name is Elsie. They told me not to speak. They said I was static, that I was only real if I listened. But I'm leaving this so someone remembers." Callie sang to me. She tapped the wall. She didn't pass their test. She failed, so they said she had to stay. But I remember her. And if you hear me, you will too. The tape clicked off. Alma sat frozen, pen still in her hand. I stared at the player, my throat burning. Proof. A voice that had been buried for nearly 40 years now cut through time, demanding to be remembered. That night, I returned to the motel and couldn't sleep. Every sound, the hum of the fridge, the creak of pipes felt like tapping. My phone buzzed once more. Another unknown text. "Don't look under the shed. That's where the ones who never had names went." I dropped the phone onto the carpet and sat in the dark. I thought of Callie's butterfly, of Elsie's voice, of the index cards cataloging children like objects. My family hadn't just been broken. We'd been part of something larger, something designed to erase the ones who didn't fit. Rain tapped against the window, steady, patient. I pressed my palm to the glass and whispered her name, Callie and then Elsie's. I whispered them like a prayer. Because if the house had taught me anything, it was that silence was the worst kind of burial, and I would not let them stay buried. The next morning broke gray and heavy, the kind of sky that pressed down on your chest. Alma and I drove back to the Reed property, past the bent mailbox and the mud-choked drive. Forensics had cleared out, but the yellow tape fluttered across the shed in the backyard like a warning. The text from the night before echoed in my head. "Don't look under the shed." We looked anyway. The shed leaned like it was ready to fall, its tin roof sagging, weeds curling through the cracks in the walls. Alma kicked the door open. Inside, the air was thick with oil and mildew. Rusted tools hung from hooks, some broken, some sharpened into odd shapes. Against the back wall lay a square of poured concrete, darker than the rest. Someone had patched it later, covering what had once been open ground. Alma crouched, pressed her palm to the slab. "Too new," she said. "This was poured after the county condemned the house. We called in the dig team." Shovels bit into the soil around the slab, picks striking hard. Hours passed. Then one of the techs called out, his voice tight. Beneath 2 feet of dirt, the soil shifted, darker, looser. They cleared more until the edge of a small box appeared. It wasn't wood or metal. It was plastic, old, cracked at the corners. They pried the lid off. Inside were scraps of fabric, small shoes, a lock of hair tied with yellow string. No bones, not yet, but enough to freeze the breath in my lungs. Children had been here. Children who were never named, never recorded. Alma's jaw tightened. She turned to me, her voice low. This wasn't just Collie or Elsie. There were more. A lot more. The team kept digging, but I stepped back, staring at the shed, at the patched concrete, at the overgrown grass swaying in the wind. I remembered the rhyme again, the one drilled into us like a prayer. 1 for food, 2 for light, 3 for sleep, 4 for night. But what about 5? 6? 7? The system hadn't stopped at us. It had gone further, hidden deeper. That night, I sat in my motel room, lights off, notebook open. I wrote their names, Collie, Elsie, and left blank spaces for the ones we hadn't found yet. The silence in the room felt thick, like someone else was breathing with me. And then, faint as the tap of a fingernail, I heard it. 4 knocks, then 3, then 1. Not memory, not imagination. A message, still alive in the dark. The shed stayed with me long after the dig team packed up. The plastic box, the scraps of fabric, the shoes, those weren't relics. They were warnings. Alma filed it all into evidence, but she didn't need to tell me what we both knew. The Reed house hadn't been the only site. The index cards proved it. The tape proved it. Even my mother's broken whispers proved it. This was part of something lighter, something that stretched beyond one family, beyond one farm. 2 days later, Alma called me into the sheriff's office. The evidence room smelled like dust and old coffee. On the table lay a stack of documents the state task force had recovered from a burned storage unit near Indianapolis. A fire had gutted most of it, but what survived was worse than anything we'd imagined. Charred fragments of letterhead, stamped with the name St. Augustine's Center for Behavioral Alignment. And beneath that, project codes, Butterfly Integration Program. I flipped through the brittle sheets. Children's names were never used. Only subjects, each paired with a brief note. Subject 3, integrated, successful. Subject 4, expired, defiant. Subject 6, retained, static. Each word sliced like glass. Expired, retained, integrated. It wasn't a family. It was a trial dot at the bottom of one log. I saw my own designation. Subject 3, integrated. My stomach twisted. I'd thought I was just a survivor. But no, I'd been measured, classified, deemed a success. Whatever they were testing, I had passed. Collie hadn't. That's why she had died. I shoved the paper away, bile rising. Alma leaned close. This is clinical language, medical. It means there were doctors involved, not just your parents. That night, I returned to the Reed property, even though Alma told me not to. The sheriff's tape sagged in the damp air, easy to step past. The house loomed, hollow-eyed, sagging with rot. I carried Callie's butterfly in my pocket, the ceramic warm from my hand. Inside, I moved by memory. My old bedroom, Beth's marks, the hallway where the vents carried whispers at night. But this time, I wasn't looking for memories. I was looking for blueprints. Somewhere in these walls lay the truth. I tore back wallpaper, pried up floorboards, opened every closet. Hours passed, dust filling my lungs. Then, behind the warped shelf in the living room, I found it. A narrow slot cut into the plaster. Inside was a folded piece of paper, yellowed with time. I unfolded it carefully. A floor plan, drawn by a child's hand. Crude squares marked my room, Mark's room, Beth's room. And in the center, another, my room, not allowed. Beneath it, stick figures behind bars. 4 of them. One circled dot my throat tightened. This wasn't mine. Wasn't Beth's. Wasn't Mark's. It was Callie's. She'd drawn her own prison. She'd known she wasn't supposed to exist, but she left proof anyway. I sank to the floor, the paper shaking in my hands. The wind moaned through the broken windows, and for a moment, I swore I heard her voice again. Please don't forget me. Got the boards creaked behind me. I spun, heart racing, but no one was there. Only the house, breathing, settling. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling I wasn't alone. When I stepped outside, the sky had gone violet, the first stars winking through. I sat on the porch steps, clutching Callie's drawing. My phone buzzed. Another unknown message. She was not the last. Look for the wall that breathes. I stared out across the yard, the shed looming in shadow, the house behind me like a rotted heart. More than Collie, more than Elsie. The files, the cards, the rhyme, they all pointed to something bigger. I whispered her name into the night, and then another. Elsie. The wind stirred, carrying the sound away. But in the silence that followed, faint and steady, I heard it again. 4 knocks. Then 3. Then 1. The walls were still speaking. And I knew I hadn't dug deep enough yet. The last time I walked into the Reed house, dawn was just breaking. Fog clung low to the ground, wrapping the yard in a pale shroud. The boards groaned beneath my steps like they remembered me. I carried only a flashlight, Callie's drawing, and the ceramic butterfly. I wasn't there for evidence anymore. I was there for answers. The message on my phone look, for the wall that breathed stayed with me. I checked every room, pressing my palms flat against the plaster. Most walls felt dead, hollow, but in the back hallway near the furnace room, the air shifted. When I leaned close, the wall exhaled. A hidden space. I pried at the plaster until it cracked away, revealing a false panel. Behind it, a crawl tunnel sloped downward, narrow and damp. My flashlight beam bounced off foam padding stapled to the walls, soundproofing. I slid inside. The air smelled of mildew and copper. The tunnel opened into a small chamber. A child's bed frame sat against the wall, rusted through. On it lay scraps of fabric decorated with faded unicorns. In the corner, claw marks covered the wood, hundreds of them, like someone spent years counting days with their fingernails. Above the bed, words etched into the beam. I was the 4th. My name was Collie. Please remember me. I dropped to my knees, throat tight, tears stinging. She hadn't just lived here. She'd fought to be remembered. Then I saw something else. A broken recorder wedged into the corner. The cassette inside was labeled in trembling red crayon. For May. My hands shook as I turned the crank. Static hissed, then her voice faint, weak, but hers. May, you knocked back. Thank you. If you hear this, it means I didn't get out. But I wasn't alone. There were more. Elsie, Tessa, Mira. Some they took. Some they hid. They said we weren't names, only numbers. But we were real. You are real too. Don't forget us. The tape clicked and fell silent. I sat there for a long time, clutching the recorder. The house was quiet, the air heavy. But for once, the silence didn't feel like erasure. It felt like memory. When I stepped back outside, the fog was lifting. The shed stood crooked, the grass whispering in the breeze. For the first time in nearly 40 years, I felt the weight of the house lift from my chest. Callie's voice had survived. She had survived in the only way she could through scratches, drawings, whispers, and tape. I knew then what I had to do. Not just for her, but for all of them. I would make their names louder than the silence. I would dig, I would write, I would speak, until no one could ever bury them again. The walls had breathed their secrets. Now it was my turn.